Hello, I'm the Real Creator, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be going over a tutorial on how I render for digital art. I'll walk you through my whole process explaining how and why I do everything that I do, and hopefully you'll find this useful if you're trying to get better at rendering. Quick disclaimer, this is not the definitive way to do rendering with digital art. This is just what I've found works best for me, and you can choose to accept or decline any advice that I give. Also, I'm drawing Raine from the Owl House, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright, time to get into this rendering tutorial. So, right now I have this piece that I'm working on, and I've already done the line art. Usually what I do for line art is I do it in like a very dark red color, and then I set that layer to multiply, so then when we later add the colors, it kind of like lightens or darkens depending on the color that's under it. And another thing that I also did off camera was I filled in the entire silhouette with gray, so then I can clip the color layers onto this layer, so when I color over it, it stays within the silhouette of the character. And also when you turn off the line art, you can see the silhouette, so it's looking pretty good so far. We have our reference of Raine up here that we're going to be using for this piece, and usually what I do when I color is that I do it in layers based on what's like under the other parts, and if two colors are right next to each other, like let's say this black and this yellow, I wouldn't put those on the same layer, like I'd put that a layer above. So that's kind of the way that I do layers. So usually what I do first is that I start with a skin tone layer. So over here on my layers, I'm gonna clip this one onto this layer, and I'm working in Infinite Painter, which like it's a pretty decent drawing app. It is a little janky sometimes, like sometimes it crashes, but it gets the job done. If you're looking into like digital art platforms, I'd say this one's a pretty good one. If you want to access like a lot of the good tools, you do have to pay like a one-time purchase of like $10. So yeah, I haven't really tried out any other digital art platforms other than like Sketchbook, so I can't say if this is like better than the others, but it's decent. So usually I start with the skin tone layer, and because we have the reference over here, I'm just gonna pull straight from that, and I'm gonna get the base color. So this is gonna be our base color, and I just kind of have this like solid pen that I use for coloring in. So I'm just gonna go ahead and fill all this in. Okay, so I filled in all of the areas of skin with this base color, and I'm also gonna say that since like the pants are also kind of below everything else, I'm gonna put that on the same layer as the skin tone layer. This is just my system of doing things. It makes it easier for when I'm like, if I want to select certain layers so I can like blend certain areas without it like overlapping with everything else. But now let's start with the skin rendering. So when we start, we're going to want to determine where the light is coming from, and I'm going to say it's coming from this upper corner over here. So that means the light's going to be shining this way and the shadows will be cast over here. So I'm going to pick my shadow color, and I say I'm going to go slightly into like, I'm going to turn it slightly red and then darken it like that, because usually when you want to get like a shadow color, you don't want to go like straight down into black, because then it looks kind of muddy and murky. Usually I go like a little bit more saturated, so it kind of makes it look more vibrant. And I have two main brushes that I use for rendering. I have this custom brush called like the shading brush is what I named it. Yeah, there we go. And it's basically just like a simple round brush, and then I also have this one called Filbert, which is like a painting brush. It has more texture, and usually when I do like fantasy stuff, I do it with the Filbert, so it kind of has more of that painting texture. And then when I do like modern or like sci-fi, I use the shading brush, so it's more smooth. I'm gonna say since this is an Owl House character, I'm gonna go with the Filbert. My system for shading is just kind of the same either way. The way that I shade like faces especially is I use like the Asaro head, so that's where you kind of get the planes of the face from. So I'm going to say if the light is coming over here, then that means the shadows are going to be on this side of the face. And so I get like the side of the forehead. I'm going to turn up the glasses layer. You got like the side of the forehead and kind of like the cheekbone right there. And then you also shade in like, well, I also shade in like the eyelids above the eyes and then like along the bridge of the nose. We're gonna blend all this out in just a second, but for now we're just kind of like blocking in those big shapes. And because the light source is coming from over here, that means the nose is going to be casting a shadow this way. So then that kind of leaves this like triangle area on the other side of the face. And I also shade a little bit under the eyes. Usually like how much shading I put under the eyes kind of depends on like usually like where the light is coming from, or even like how prominent like the eye bags are, like if it's like an older character kind of like this, or if the character is sleep deprived. I'm also gonna fill in like the insides of the ears right here because the light wouldn't be hitting over there. Also on the neck. I usually put like a little bit of the shadow up here at like the top of the forehead, and I'm gonna blend it out later along with like everything else. Then with the hands, it just kind of depends on like where the light is hitting, so you can kind of just get shaded on like the opposite side of where the light would be. It's pretty simple. And so we blocked in all the shadows like this, and then I'm gonna go and get the blender, and I also blend in like the same brush that I used to put all the colors in. Blend that out. It's like a softer edge up here, and when you're like shading face, you got to keep in mind like the soft edges and like the more hard edges, like depending on where everything is. So like over here, this is going to be a little bit more, actually I think this is going to be a bit like a soft edge, but over here on the nose it's going to be more like a hard edge. And I know I put like a shadow right here, but because the light is hitting over here, I might actually go over that with the normal skin tone, and then I'll put like a highlight over there later. Just gonna blend everything out. I do like to have a little bit of like the painterly texture though, because it just makes it look nicer. I've been watching a lot of season 2 of the Owl House lately, so I'm getting like a lot of fan art ideas, which is why we're drawing Raine today. So I do also want to make some art like Ida and Lilith and like all the other characters. But yeah, no spoilers, because I'm still not done with season 2. Okay, so we've got our base shadow all blended out, but usually I go in with a second layer of shadow, which is going to be like the core shadow. So we're going to go back in to this sort of like more saturated color again. My camera might be going in and out of focus. I'm not focusing on my camera, I'm focusing on what I'm drawing. So basically I'm going to go into like those darker areas, kind of like inside the cheekbones, inside the ear, this side of the face. And you also gotta go like under the nose, because that's usually where it's like darkest. And also right here on the inside the bridge of the nose, that's usually where I put these sort of areas. And if you're a person who does makeup, like it's actually kind of very useful to think of skin rendering like makeup, like you're putting the contour on. So you can kind of do that, and you can also put it in like the darker areas where the light just wouldn't be hitting in other places. Now that we've got that, we can blend that in. Okay, now that we've got the core shadow all blended out, we're going to move on to the highlights on the face. And I'm going to get a bit of like a yellowish highlight, because it's going to be not only because like the skin tone's kind of warm, but also because there's going to be like a yellow light source. So you can put like those highlights on like tip of the nose and like this plane of the cheek, set forehead, a little bit on the chin, just like a little bit on the ears, just kind of like in the places where the light would be hitting the most. Blend, 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 just like makeup. You know, light does hit a little bit brighter in some spots than others, so you can kind of like blend it in depending on the area to kind of make certain spots brighter and other spots darker. I think skin rendering is a very fun part of this process. Like, it always looks like so satisfying, but that's the skin rendering done. Now we can move on to the other areas of the drawing. So because the pants are red, I think a really good way to shade in red is to go into a bit of a purple color, because color theory. And then we can just lay in those base shadows like before. That might be a bit too purple actually, but we're gonna lay in those base shadows like before, just all the areas where the light would not be hitting. It's very, very simple. The camera might be altering these colors a little bit because I'm filming a screen, but yeah, you can blend out this edge because it's going to be nice and soft. And then we could do basically the same thing that we do with the skin, where you get a bit of like a darker core shadow to kind of fill in these darker areas, and then you blend that out, and then you get a warmer highlight color, although the highlight's not going to be as prominent on clothes because the face would be a little bit more reflective than the clothes. But that's basically like the process that I follow for the whole rest of the drawing. Like, I'll make more layers and then I'll do it in the spots where like certain things don't overlap. So usually on the second layer, I go in to like fill in like the white of the eye and just, you know, keep going from there. One thing that I do with the eye is that I usually actually shade it a little bit with a little bit of the color of the actual like pupil. So we'll go with like a desaturated green, and then I'll select this layer so that it doesn't like overlap, and then I can, too big. Wait, I selected the wrong brush! Yeah, and then you can like fill in this sort of area and then blend it out so that the eye has a little bit of shading. Rendering for the rest of the clothes is pretty similar with what I did with the pants, so I think I'm gonna move on to the hair because that's like the next notable part. I'm gonna steal a base color from here. I'm actually gonna cheat a little bit and make it a little bit more saturated just because I feel like it. And then you can block in that whole solid color. I actually went back and kind of desaturated the hair a little bit again because it wasn't really matching the reference. But now that we've filled in this whole base color, we're gonna pick our shadows. And usually what I like to do with green is that I like to dip a little bit into the blue to kind of make it more teal, because I like color theory. And then I kind of do the same thing where I like block in the basic shadows. I selected the wrong brush again, darn it. I keep mixing up my filbert and my flat oil. Basically, you can block in those shadows again, and usually for hair, I do like this little like streaky thing along the parts where you'd see like the different strands of hair, and then I'm gonna blend it out later in a way that makes it look like hair. Okay, so now that we have this base shadow blocked in, I also kind of have it a little bit on the tips just because that's what I do. I'm gonna get the blender, and then I'm kind of gonna do it in a bit of more like a messy, streaky way to kind of get a sense of like those hair strands. It's gonna be a lot more subtle up here because the light's hitting it, but like down here, I'm gonna definitely do like more of like a hair strand sort of thing. I'm kind of blending it around like these big chunks of hair. You might not be able to even see what I'm doing because the light's shining on the screen and it's making it hard to see. But basically, I'm kind of blending around these like chunks of the hair so that certain areas are shaded, and you can kind of like make out these big strands here, aside from just like, you know, the line art. Okay, now that we have that, we can get a little bit more of like that core shadow again. We're gonna go even a little bit more blue so it makes it look more teal. I need it darker. And then we're gonna just kind of get those little bits in areas where the light would be hitting the least. It's kind of the same process every single time of like base shadow, core shadow, highlights. Then blend it out in the same way we were blending before, where you can kind of make out the hair strands. Sorry if this is terrible, because like I could not find a good camera angle where the light would not be shining directly onto the screen. So if it's reflecting bad and you can't see, I'm sorry. I don't really have a decent setup. I just kind of have my phone propped up on like a tablet stand right now. So we're making it work. We're making it work. Okay, admittedly, I'm not sure how to do this little like lightning hair bit on Raine's hair here, so we're gonna improvise a bit. We're gonna see what we can do. I think I'm maybe gonna get like a white and then kind of like fill in this whole area, and then I'm gonna lower the opacity. Like we're improvising a bit. We're figuring things out. I'm learning things too. Okay, now that I've blended out this bit of white on a separate layer, I'm gonna lower the opacity a bit. Does that work? Does that work? I don't know. I feel like that looks weird. That looks kind of weird. Okay, well, I don't know. It's weird because like the light's hitting it weird. But you know what? We're gonna roll with it. We're gonna roll with it. Maybe I'll change it later. We'll see. Okay, so then we get to do the highlights of the hair, and I'm gonna just get the base color, and I'm gonna go a little bit of like a warmer color. My camera keeps going out of focus, so I'm sorry if you can't see. And then I'm just gonna kind of fill in like these areas where the highlights would be, and then I'm gonna go ahead and blend that into the rest of the hair in a way that makes it kind of look a little bit streaky. And again, I'm gonna kind of like blend away like those outer edges of like where the bigger hair strands would be, so it kind of looks like it's highlighting like the top of it. It kind of gives each big chunk of hair a little bit more volume. Sometimes the highlight that I add isn't really that bright, so I'm gonna go in with like an even brighter highlight color to just kind of like add highlights to the highlights. Okay, that's the hair all done, and that's kind of like the only other notable thing for like rendering, because the rest of the outfit is pretty similar to what I did with the pants. So I think I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna fill in the rest of the character, and then I'm gonna check back in with you later, so then we can go on to like backgrounds and lighting and stuff. Okay, we are back, and I've finished rendering most of the clothes, but there are a few things that stuck out to me that I remember that I render a little bit differently, so I was just gonna go over those real quick. The first thing is the eyebrows. I don't really do much with the eyebrows, but as you can see, I did add a little bit of this texture here. I actually used this flat iron brush, the one I kept mixing up with the filbert, and I just get like the hair color, and then I just kind of like go over and give it a little bit of that texture. I already did most of it, but that was just another thing I wanted to go over. And then the eyes. For the eyes, I do have this base color down already, and then usually I do kind of the same thing where I go into a bit of a darker color, sometimes make it a little warmer or cooler, and then what I do is I shade it in a certain way. I shade like across the top and then around like the sides, so that there's kind of like this bright part in the middle, and then just blend that out. And then I do like a few layers of this, so I'm gonna get an even darker color and go over it again like this. I think I usually do about like 3 different layers of this, just kind of building it up, making the eye darker along the top than it is on the bottom. And then the final one is like usually pretty dark. And then what I do is I'm also going to use this color for the pupil, because I don't do a pure black pupil. I do it in the color of the eyes, so I'm just gonna fill that in. There's the eyes, and then you gotta add the highlight. You just get white, and then whop, whop, just like that. And I also sometimes add like a little secondary one, just to give the eyes a little extra sparkle. And then the next thing that I want to do is the gold lining around their outfit, because I also do gold in a certain way. I've started off with this base color that's kind of like a yellow, but I kind of bring it a little bit over into like desaturated. And then for the shadows, I go a little more orange and like dark like that. And then I just block in all the shadows. We blend everything out. Okay, now all the shadows are blending out, and now like the key to making the gold look, you know, gold is to actually get a bright highlight color. I usually go a little bit more yellow with this, and I go like a bright color. So then you can add like the highlights where the light would be hitting, and that really makes it look like shiny gold. Blend it out. And see, it makes it look all nice and shiny. And also, if you're wondering how I did the glasses up here, I literally just filled it in with white and then lowered the opacity over here. So it's pretty simple. But now that we have the character done, it's time to move on to the background. And I have a confession to make. I am terrified of backgrounds. I suck at backgrounds. But you know what? We're gonna face this together. We're gonna figure this out. I have this reference image from the show, so I'm gonna be basing the background off of that. I did just make a new custom brush for the sake of making backgrounds, so we're gonna experiment a little bit. Okay, I'd say this isn't really that bad of a background, but anyways. Right now, Raine is just sort of like sticking out, but we're gonna integrate them into the landscape through some lighting. Since it's a little bit shady in this forest, I'm gonna go ahead and get a very light color like this, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select the entire character and then just fill in with this color, and then set that to multiply, and you immediately got some lighting. Now this might be a little bit too dark, so I'm gonna fill it in with just something a little bit lighter. Since the light is going to be coming from this direction, I'm going to just like faintly erase parts of this with just like a soft airbrush to kind of bring a little bit of that brightness out. And I'm thinking of having like a bright glowing light source coming from over here. So I'm gonna go get that airbrush again, and I'm gonna get like a very light kind of warm color like this, and I'm gonna do this over the background. I'm just gonna kind of like fill all this in. And since I've got this like bright lighting color, I'm gonna go ahead and add the lighting onto the character. So I have this on a separate layer above the multiply layer, and I'm gonna go back to that filbert, and I'm just going to add it over in all the places where the light would be hitting. So it would be like on the nose, like on the cheek, and a little bit like on the hair, and just like all these spots where the light would be reflecting. I've just kind of sloppily added like all this light in all these places, but I'm gonna be blending it out so that it looks natural. And there we go. Now all the light is blended in, so it's reflecting off very nicely. And I think it's safe to say that I am done with this drawing. That is how I render my drawings. But of course, there's one thing that we cannot forget. Perfect. Well, there we have it. That was my tutorial on how to render for digital art, at least if you want to get something that looks like this. If you found this video useful, then go ahead and give it a like. Drop a comment if there's any sort of tutorials you'd like to see me do in the future, and subscribe for more videos. I post one every Sunday. If you're here because you like the Owl House, I made a video that's a speed paint of me drawing Luz while I talk about my thoughts on Season 1. Or if you want something more informative, last week I posted a deep dive into creating and designing strong characters. But that's enough of my yapping. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.